Where are you located?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. I didn't know Patsy like contacted me, and I didn't actually know where Patsy was teaching these days. So I was like,
Gotcha.
oh, cool, totally happy to do it. Don't know where you're at. So that's why when you ask like 2 o'clock work, I'm like, I have no idea what 2 o'clock you mean. So,
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about it when I asked. I was like, oh yeah, people don't live in the same place.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but what's your major?
Digital media technologies.
Digital media technologies. Wow. Okay. Like I'm so used to like talking to writers or film directors. And you're like,
Yeah.
what is digital media technology? Is that is that toward what do you do with that?
Uh, it's a lot of like filming, in some cases directing. Uh, yeah, just kind of like I guess depending on which major, but I'm specifically going into like TV and studio production. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like behind the camera, working on television or movie sets, all of that stuff.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I fell backwards into this field, so I don't know. I've learned all the jargon along the way, so it's always like, wait, when did people major into to become this? Because I started out as a playwright and found my way into this, so I didn't it wasn't a target, It was like
Yeah, yeah.
fell backwards into doing film TV, but it worked out.
I guess with that, I might as well ask first, why did you want to become a playwright?
I didn't like that was like that was the kind of thing. Like when I started out, I wanted to when I was like in my young years, being like junior high and stuff like that. Like I wanted to be a novelist. I just wanted to write novels. And being a kid of Asian descent, my very practical parents were not keen on the idea of me being a novelist. So they really pushed me into journalism because they're like, oh, we get what that is. We don't know what book writing is, but we know there's a newspaper in our small town. They have jobs. They write about stuff. We get that. Why don't you be a journalist? And I was like, sure, totally happy to do that. And so I went to Louisiana Tech University, a small university near where I lived, to major in journalism. And then my first assignment was to cover a story for the 4-H club. I just had to go to the 4-H club and write a very basic article like this. If you're interested in horses, you can be at this hour at this time, weekly. Blah. And it was this little thing. I was like, wait, this is what journalism is? And they're like, yeah. And once you get good at this, it's like this isn't really hard. Then you can do like feature stories, and then from there you can, and then they came to the trajectory of it all. I was like, oh, but I don't want to do this. So then I quit a week into that major, and I walked over to the theater department because it was the only other thing I liked in high school was acting. So I was like, I'm gonna apply to be an acting major. And it was a small school, so they didn't have a lot of kids there, so it was really easy for me to get in to the studio. Like I auditioned, got in because there was only like 20 something of us. Um, and so I did that. And 3 years into that program, I realized quite quickly that I was or not quite that quickly. After 3 years, I realized I was a terrible effing actor. Like I sucked so bad at acting, and we were doing our boards, and I was like, I'm about to graduate next year, and with a degree in something that I'm not good at, and I just asked straight up to my professors, like, hey, I'm bad, right? And they're like, you're not the best. I was like, yeah, but in life, can I make a living doing this shit? And they're like, no. So I was like, okay, so this is making me panic a little bit. What the hell should I do? And they're like, well, you clearly love writing because I wrote everyone's monologues for our boards. And it's like, you love writing. Why don't you? Oh,
Sorry, my roommate walked in.
oh,
You're fine. Keep talking.
sorry. They told me, hey, why don't you love writing? Why don't you try out writing plays? And I was like, oh, well, cool. Would that mean like you can get into MFA program? And all I heard was, oh, I can go to grad school and avoid graduating for 3 more years. So I was like, oh, that's what I'll do. Not because I wanted to be a playwright, just because I wanted to not go out into the world with something I sucked at, which was acting. So then I applied a whole bunch of schools. Weirdly, I ended up at the same university that Patsy was at because I got accepted into an Ivy League, but my parents were like, wait, how much does that cost? I was like, cost this much. And they're like, oh shit, you can't go there to be a writer. So then when Ohio University was like, well, we'll pay Qui to come here, they're like, you should go here, don't go there because that'd be stupid. And of course, I turned down like a really good school. I mean, not that Ohio isn't a great school, but I turned down like a thing that would have had like on paper a lot of advantages for me coming out of school. But then I got into playwriting, really loved it, and it ended up being like obviously the path that created my career, right? But it was not as conscious. It was really like I failed at being an actor, so I then decided to be a writer. So
Yeah,
that's how it worked out.
that's really that's really interesting. Just because I got into digital media because I originally went to school for business, and I was like, this isn't for me. So I think that's
Yeah,
just really funny.
yeah. No, I think that's the thing. I think the whole pressure when you're young to figure out your path is kind of like because I think of everyone that's literally my age. That's like we're all in our 40s. We're all working in this field, and like yeah, there are definitely some like my co-director on the last two movies. Like he wanted to direct movies for Disney his whole life. But for the most part, for most of us, we found our way, including the CCO of the entire company, Jen Lee. She didn't know she wanted to work at Disney. Like we all kind of found we through a series. I always say through a series of failures, I got to where I'm at. Right? Like I failed at being an actor. That's what made me a playwright. When I got into the real world, I started a theater company, Vampire Cowboys, because I failed at having anyone produce my plays. I then ended up going to TV and film because I failed at making that theater company earn enough money for me to make a living from it. And then because I failed at ever making it on or being on any TV show that had more than one season, I found myself into film. And then I I did well in film, but like but you know what I'm saying, like it was a
Yeah.
series of failures and adjustments and pivots that got me from point A to point B. Like it wasn't a straight line, and I wouldn't even say I'm envious of people who do have a straight line. I'm like it's great that you did, but actually all those ebbs and flows, every turn was a huge part of what makes me the artist I am today. Like a lot of the stories I pull from, a lot of the things that motivate me come from all of those, good times and bad times. And there are definitely people that work at Disney Animation that went to Cal Arts, applied for a job at Disney literally after they graduated, and have been with Disney ever since for like 15 years. And so, but then I start to go, where do you derive story from? And they derive story from purely from their imaginations, from these what if scenarios, which is important because we are world builders. But then there's those that of us that have lived a really full life, and so where you're pulling that, the emotion of it is coming from like real lived experiences. So I think it's that marriage of like real lived experiences with that great imagination that can make a good film. I mean, like a really great film or a great story. Because it's not that I'm lacking imagination either, but it is like the heartbeat of my stuff always comes from a very real place. Whereas like some of the people I work with, it's literally they'll doodle like a cloud with a face and rainbows coming out their butt, and it's like I found a character. Let's build a story around him. Like weird that's how you come up with stories, but cool. I'm glad you drew some weird doodle that's going to be the next great feature. Great, but for me, it's always like what am I trying to say? What are the stories I'm looking for? What have I lived? And what do I need to say next?
Yeah. I guess on that topic of you talking about stories and how you come up with them, my school is doing She Kills Monsters for our school play.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious how you came up with like your inspiration for that and where did
That
that all come from?
that came two things about She Kills Monsters. Like it was a play I wrote overnight.
Okay.
So I wrote that incredibly fast because kind of the origins of the story are we got commissioned to Vampire Cowboys got commissioned to make a play with a company called The Flea in New York, and they had a company of actors called the Bats. And so I was already working on another play. And here's the thing: I don't remember what other play I was working on, but I remember I was working on some other play at the same time. And Robert, my co-director at Vampire Cowboys, was like, "Hey, he's always wanted to do quote unquote devised theater, meaning the actors improv a whole bunch of stuff, and then we'll come up with a play from their improvisations because that's where he came from. He came from that in Canada. And he's like, oh, I loved making devised work. Let's do this again. I want to do this, with Vampire Cowboys. And I was like, absolutely, that sounds awesome. That means I don't got to write anything. I'm totally happy with that shit. And so he for 2 weeks did that, and then I show up like on a Thursday, uh, and he's like he showed me what they like. Oh, this is what we got, and it was just garbage. It was just a whole bunch of weird scenes that didn't connect, and they were just about nothing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. They have. He's like, oh wait, just to let you know, the artistic director is showing up on Saturday to see what we have. And I was like, wait, but we don't have anything. And his response was like, I know, that's why I'm telling you that this now, in case you just wanted to write something, maybe. And I was like, oh, fuck, all right. And so that night, out of sheer panic, I wrote She Kills Monsters. And She Kills Monsters, and this is where I go, it comes from a real place from heart. I had in the back of my head wanting to write something for years, something to honor my childhood best friend, Chuck, who had passed away when I was literally my first off Broadway show. The night of the premiere, I got a call from his cousin to tell me that he passed away from leukemia. And I never knew he was ever sick. Uh, and he was my childhood best friend who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. I mean, I've known him literally since kindergarten. But like the play, I'd lost contact with him as I became a young adult. And then to find out that he had passed away, I would never get a chance. And I promised, and it was still one of those things where the last time I saw him, I promised to get a beer with him. And I never, and I was like, every time I came back in town, I was like, I'm gonna get that beer with Chuck. But I always, I got busy with, the small time I was there with my family and stuff. And so I would miss it. And then I realized I had lost that opportunity altogether, that I never got to see him. But more importantly, I never got to say, hey, Chuck, thank you for introducing me to all the things that I fucking love in life. Like he was there to introduce me to like Dungeons and Dragons, comic books. We rented like literally stacks of VHSs during the days of home movie rentals. And like we would like study tapes. Like we rent like a stack of horror movies and just watch all these movie makers, like action movies, romantic comedies. And so he really introduced me into all this stuff, and I just missed out on that. So I knew I wanted to write something about him and that story. And I had always had this fantasy like, oh, what if Chuck would have left me a journal, just to so I could find out who he was post the last time I saw him. And so it was that wish fulfillment of what that story would be. And the other thing that kind of like kind of was the important thing. I dated two girls in high school that, and I'll just be honest, they were crazy homophobic, right? Like these two girls that were crazy homophobic, and they were close friends, both super homophobic. But then, fast forward 5 years later or 4 years later, they both came out of the closet, and they were both gay, and they were homophobic because of each other, because they're like, oh, well, if you're scared of lesbians, then I hate lesbians. Like, well, and then same vice versa. But then when they got to college, they're like, oh, but we actually are because now we're away from each other. And just to see how their friendship rekindled. But it was just like they were literally the best friends ever, but they weren't brave enough to tell this one thing to each other that was really crucial to who they were. And it's like they're always like, not that they were going to hook up or anything, but like the fact that they could have shared a journey in that. So like both those things were fresh in my mind, and I was like, well, I gotta write something super fast, so I wrote that. That was like the thing. Those were like the combinations. I wanted to honor these friendships of my life, and that became the crux of She Kills Monsters. And I've always been really good at like story structure, so it was really easy to go, well, and I always do three tricks. I'm always like, I need to know my main character, I need to know how it ends, I need to know what it's about. And once I get those three buoys, then I can like mark it out real fast on outline, which I outline every story I've ever done. And then I just kind of look at the outline and I just like stare at it and just blind type it all the way to the end. And I'm like, haha, done it. And I thought it was a throwaway piece. I just thought it was like, I did it. We did it here. They'll perform it. I choreographed the fight with the giant dragon puppet. Who cares? I had no idea it would take the life that it did. Like it's been produced like literally 1,000 times. There's thousands of kids who've played all these roles. It's been produced all around the world. And I'm just like, holy shit, that was completely accidental. Like it was a story that decided to tell itself more than I was like, there's stories that I've worked real hard to tell, and they kind of sometimes turn out okay. And then there's some stories that I kind of just like my two most well-known plays, She Kills Monsters and Vic Gone, which is the other one, are two plays that I literally wrote within like 48 hours. I wrote Vic Gone in 48 hours. I wrote this in 24 hours, She Kills Monsters. And they're my two most well-known plays. Whereas other plays I've worked like months on, or if not years, and they're just like, yeah, it happened. never to be produced again. It's like, okay, dude, does this mean I just gotta work less, try hard, try less hard? I don't know. That should not be the lesson I'm bestowing, but that I do find that ironical that that is something that that's true in my life.
Uh, I guess with you saying that like the your two like projects that you've like tried the least on, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I tried to word that properly without it. Yeah. Uh, were like super like popular. What is like the one project that you worked on that like is your favorite? Like the one thing you wrote that's like your absolute favorite.
My favorite thing, oh man, that's hard because I always think of the four things that I've worked on that probably define me the most. Or when I think of like, if I can only go, hey, you only choose four things of your canon, it would be She Kills Monsters, Vic Dawn, this other play, The Inexplicable Redemption of Agent G, and then Ryan the Last Dragon. I think those are really emblematic of who I am. Because in a lot of ways, like all my other plays were fun, but these were the ones that were like huge, were very personal. Each one of them, like She Kills Monster was about my childhood best friend. Vic Gone was about literally my parents' love story. This story, Inexplicable Redemption of G, was literally about me and my inability to write about my family because I always fucked it up. And then Ryan the Last Dragon was basically everything I ever written was Vampire Cowboys, just done as a Disney movie. Like it's like the voice of my characters. It had a female lead. There was clearly a romantic relationship between the two things, even though it was Disney, so I wasn't able to like lean into it just yet. But like it all kind of dealt with the stuff that I really care. Like, and I wrote that Raya specifically for my kids, who I was like, oh, I want you to have heroes that look like you. And so that's where Raya came from. And I'm very excited about all the other stuff that I'm working on, like Strange World's about to come out in 2 weeks. Super excited about that movie. It's my first movie I've ever directed. Uh, and I've learned a lot from it, but it's my second movie. It's not my first, and Raya will always have a special place in my heart because of that. Yeah, so those are probably the four. Those are the four things. If there was a fifth in there, I guess I would throw Strange World in because it's my first directing gig. So how about that?
I am very excited to see Strange World. I just because I love the Disney movies. I watched Raya. I enjoyed that one a lot. And I'm quite excited to see Strange World. And I didn't realize when Patsy had got me my interview with you that like you were like the writer of those until I was researching. I was like, oh my God. This is like
Oh,
yeah. This is
yeah.
someone who like works for like Disney and all that.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
it's an incredible thing that they do there. Like it's like with Rye, I was just a writer on it. So like I made it through story, we picture locked, made through basically most of the edit. And then I was like, once that was done, I rolled off and went back onto Strange World and started working on that. Strange World, I went through the entire process. So I went through layout, I went through animation, I went through color and lighting. I saw the effects team. I watched rudimentary like I gave notes on every single part of the process, which is so super satisfying. Like the stuff that you would be doing, I got to be part of, which is crazy amazing. But it also makes me realize like here's the thing, what you do is actual skill. Like you actually have to go to school with that. In a lot of ways what I do is everybody can write words. I'm good at putting words in a structure because I've been doing it for a long time, but everybody knows how to write. As a director, everyone knows how to have an opinion because that's all it is to be a director. Have an opinion, make sure you're all kind of going the same direction. But what you do actually has skill. I look at my team that's 450 people deep, and I'm like, at some point, they're going to realize they're more important in this process than we're on. And they could easily like coup and take us over. But like, you just can't let them know that. So like, because there's no way we could do what any of them do. Like a single person, like if you're like, hey, Kui, do some simple animation. Nope. Storyboard. Nope. How about could you just like maybe edit this together? No, no. Like I could, but it'd be terrible. So yeah, so I can't do any of the things that everyone, but they all can do what I do. So it's always like, shh, don't let them know. Don't know that all I do is write funny words.
uh I guess my next question is what are the unique like not pro- but strengths and weaknesses of directing versus playwriting versus I guess writing for like animated movies? Like what are the
Yeah.
differences between all three of those?
Well, with writing plays, to be frank, there's not a lot of money in it. And when there's not a lot of money, I mean, Kevin Smith is probably, I don't know if you're following him, but like when there's not a lot of money involved, you have a lot more control, right? You don't have to take notes. Like as I said, there's no artistic director on this planet that pays me enough for me to give a shit. Like I'm like, oh, it's cute that you think that that's what you want me to do in my play, but I'm not gonna do it because I don't care because there's no money. As you go, like when you go into film, there's ton. I mean, when you go into big studio film, like if you're doing indies, is different. Big studio films, like I've been doing, there there's no way I can fundraise $250 million to do my movie. So like their notes have to matter because without their money, I can't do what I do, you know? So I mean, and the thing is like, if I were to split it up, like I think what I love about like theater is it's probably the most unfiltered me. What I love about film is the reach. I love that reach, but it also means I do have to take notes. What I love about directing is basically it's like the you get the final edit of your script, right? Like because like as a screenwriter, you kind of you get right up to a point, but then basically if the direction's off, it can really change the meaning of a scene that you've written. But when you're directing it too, it allows you to really give the full, like, I meant the scene to be this. Now I'm directing it to make sure that it is actually this. Like this scene was funny, let's make it funny. But like when you're just a screenwriter, like the director can easily go, oh, actually, I think it'd be better as a dramatic scene. And you're like, but so it gives you kind of like the final edit. It gives you one more rewrite before it goes out into the world. What I love about like film, TV, and all that is I do like the collaboration of it all. Like in playwriting, you write by yourself, and then it's not until you start to produce it that you get to be in the room with directors and actors and a team. Whereas with film, TV, you start out in a writer's room. You're starting out with the director and creative execs and storyboard artists. Like you're with folks developing it together. So the thing that I love the most about what I do is the collaboration part. And so with film, TV, I get to start that right away, and that I find super fun and satisfying. But it is less of an art or tour thing than when you're being a playwright. That's much more unfiltered me. So it really depends. And because of that, stories in my brain work differently. Like if it's super personal, I almost would rather write as a play. If it's something that I'm just like, oh, this would be really fucking fun. I think that the world and the underpinning is personal, then I kind of think of it as a film or a TV thing.
Okay, give me one sec. I was looking at like my other questions.
Okay, absolutely. I talk a lot, so I apologize if I'm like screwing
No,
up.
you're fine.
I can talk less. So.
No, talk as much as you want. I'm enjoying it. This is all very useful for me. Uh, I guess with after I guess since I asked about like uh what the difference between all of those three are, I guess I'll also ask what advice would you give to like people who like want to get into playwriting and also like screenwriting. Like I'll say those advices would be different. Like you said, there's no money in playwriting, but like what advice would you give to both parties, I guess?
I would actually say this for both. This is not a specific. This isn't one or the other. Like I think that like what's so great about making stuff in 2022 than say 1999 when I started is you can just make it now. You can just make mostly all the stuff. Like all this equipment is really easily accessible at this point. Like you want to make a show, go make a show, go make a few shows. And especially when you're in school. In school, you can just borrow facilities, grab some folks, make a show. You can borrow cameras. And the truth is, at this point, you can make a movie off of this, right? Like that, like my friend Sean Baker, who did Tangerine and Florida Project, his first movie was done on completely on an iPhone with non-actors, right? That's Tangerine. Like he actually got people off the street. And scripted the thing together and then shot it with his iPhone. And weirdly, because he shot it with his iPhone, it actually kind of opened a doorway to a career for him that now he gets paid lots of money to do other things. And so like I would say, like you don't I think what people get hung up on is trying to do features early or full-length plays early. I think that like when you're starting out and you're still trying to find your voice, because like I think the only thing that this career, you only need two things. I think that this, and I think this is true. And one is tenacity, which is the ability to keep going even when you're being told no, which you can kind of control. Like you're just like, no, I don't want you yet. You're like, fuck it, I'm gonna keep working. That's something you can control. And the other thing is harder to control because it will happen when it happens, which is voice. So tenacity and voice, because voice only comes from doing it enough times that you start to go, oh, this is my vibe, this is my style, this is what I like doing, this is what I don't like doing. These are my values as a storyteller. And the only way you can find that out is by doing it. And so I would say like make a shitload of shorts, like do 20 10-minute plays, do 37-minute videos, find your voice and all that. Once you find that, then you're off to the races. And it does, I'm not saying you need to do 20 videos to do it. Like some people have a voice right away. I know writers that as soon as they started putting pen to paper had a voice and then they started working right away. But it took several of us, myself included, years to really develop what was the aesthetic, what are my story values in that. And you can do that as a director. You, like so I would just say go do it. Go do it. Like you can just shoot some video. Almost every computer comes with like iMovie, not the best editing software in the world, but at least it's easier than what we had before when you had to actually cut and shoot film. Like when I was in school, you had to rent equipment, right? And you actually, because we were all shooting on VHS, which is fucking dumb. You had to you had to have like the giant fucking video thing, and it still came out looking like crap, right? And so, and then you had, it was like all this like literal hard giant equipment, but no one just had that laying around the house. So it was so hard. Like I remember Kevin Smith. I always talk about Kevin Smith a lot because I think about his career and how early on he was like, he's like, if I had to start today, I wouldn't have a career because my first movie visually looks like shit, which was Clerks. It was just like I locked down a camera, a VHS camera, and just shot myself in black and white. And like all the scenes are too long. We have, but yet he had such a distinct writing voice that didn't really matter. But he said like in his podcast, like, but literally kids today on YouTube are filming more advanced shorts than I did, and I spent money and went to school for that shit. And they're just like, I'm a high school kid who just like shot this together with my fucking iPhone, and it's way better. And it's like because of that, I think that yes, it is. I think it's become more competitive because more people are learning the craft earlier than even when before they get to school, right? Like you probably knew a lot of the stuff you're doing now, even though you're going to school for it. You're like, I kind of actually knew a little bit of this, and that's the advantage that I think the next generation has, or your generation has, which I just think makes me excited about how you guys are going to evolve storytelling, evolve what we see next, right? Like some of it we throw back because everyone like, I want to honor the filmmakers I love, but then a lot of you will also be like, yeah, that's great that we honored that, but what is the next movement in storytelling? What is the next vibe, right? Because without a doubt, the last decade is starting to die, right? Like like we're getting tired of the Marvel movies. We're getting tired of that Josh Whedon sarcastic, jokey thing. We're getting tired of the 30-minute fist fight, super heroic fist fight at the end. So you're seeing that starting, that kind of geek culture thing, which I'm very much a part of. It's starting to like go, hey, people are starting to go, what's next? I'm ready to see something new. And I think that's on your generation to figure out what that new thing is. And that's exciting because you should. My generation made geeks cool. Your generation can make something else cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, because like when I was a kid growing up, it was all about the action star, like there was the Schwarzenegger and the Stallones and like these John Claude Van Dammes that were super cheese. But so, and I wasn't ever going to be that, but I could make a whole bunch of nerds cool, which is like that's the generation I'm in, making nerds cool. And I already feel like my little kid who's 13 and 9, they're like, oh, dad, superheroes. I'm like, cool. You don't understand. When I grew up, there was no one like the best superhero movie was like Superman going on fucking metal wires. It was terrible. But you get like the Avengers, so shut up. But I could tell that they're wanting something different. And I'm sure you want something different too. So I look forward to what you guys make next.
You mentioned how like you're big into geek culture, and like
Mm-hmm.
you're when you grew up, that like wasn't like a big thing, right? Like, yeah. How do you feel about like the evolution and like the popularity of like geek culture throughout the years? Because it's gotten like almost like mainstream at this point, right?
Well, I wouldn't even say it's getting. I think it is mainstream, right? Like I think that like And I only know because like when I go out for generals and people want to meet me, like that is the strength. Like I got a career because I started a theater company based on quote unquote geek theater. That She Kills Monsters very much part of that, and so we kind of wrote. I was very lucky to ride a wave that my generation was like already taking over. When we got a hold of Hollywood, like people like Kevin Feige was like, I'm a nerd and I want to make nerd shit, and I was able to like be part of that, right? And I like Black Panthers just dropped yesterday, right? And it's just like one of those things where it's like, this is like there's old people who want to go see Black Panther. It's no longer relegated to a whole bunch of like nerdy teenagers who played Nintendo all day, which was who I was. It's now like everybody wants to see it. And that's super, super exciting. And so like I think that like the evolution of that has been really gratifying in some ways, but also I think the shortcomings of what we did as a generation, there's still room to evolve, right? Like I think that like as much as we evolve, I as a person of color making this stuff, like I see pushback from like older nerds, to be quite honest. They're like, don't change what Superman looks like. Don't change that. Why do you make that character gay? Like it's always like you feel pushback from a certain sector of that toxic fandom. That I'm just like, oh, what's so nice to see with like your generation, Gen Z coming up, is not only are you more progressive and more evolved in that, you can actually kind of ignore all that. You're just like, fuck off, old guys, okay, boomers, and you're just anyways. And I'm excited to see that because like I feel like my generation, while making geek theater, was such a reaction to the isolation we were feeling in the 80s and 90s. Like, you're nerds, go away. You'll never amount to anything except for like computers. And then to suddenly have us be the mainstream storytellers, it was like the opposite. But it was definitely a reaction to that kind of bullying. Without that out of the way, those who just fucking love this stuff, who just love like anime, manga, video games, all that's part of popular culture now. To a point where even I, as a you know Gen Xer, I don't quite get it, right? And to see what you guys do as storytellers with that as your backing, like my backing was like comic books. Yours is you guys also are more globally connected than I was because we were part of the birth of the internet, but I didn't consider anyone outside of my small town. I definitely didn't consider anyone in Japan or Korea or London. I just didn't have that ability to connect. I had to like go to like bins and like get like the rare video cassette of like Robotech or Dragon Ball Z. It was so hard to get material outside of that, but you guys have access to. I look at your manga right there on your back shelf. Like that wouldn't exist in my childhood. And that is stories that you get to pull from, be influenced by. It's just a much more global, much more interesting canvas to be painting from. But it's not like I can't artificially put that into my DNA. It has to just be part of your DNA, right? Like it's easy for Kevin Feige to make Marvel because he grew up loving comic books. But it's hard for Kevin Feige to suddenly want to do a whole bunch of manga because he didn't grow up reading manga. You did. That's going to be part of this. And I think that you see the failures of it, right? And I see the timer, so I'm trying to talk fast. But like when superhero movies started in Hollywood, right? Like you go back in the like 90s and stuff, they were bullshit. They were terrible because those people actually didn't grow up or love comic books. It wasn't until this generation that came up that really loved it that you saw the real fruition of it. Likewise, we have movies based on manga right now that aren't that great because it's Hollywood executives going, oh, you know what, a great place to find material IP from is manga. You should read something. And so we're reading it quickly and we're giving a take on it, but it's not coming from a real place of love. If you grew up with it and you cared about it, then suddenly you can become the Kevin Feige of that next generation of going, oh, I know what this is because it's ingrained in me. You're not having to like come from it from an outside place. You're going from inside out instead of outside in. And I think that is going to make better movies. And you really get to see that. Hollywood's trying to figure it out. And they can't because what they're doing is they're trying to speed up a process that isn't organically happening. When it organically gets there, like the Marvel movies did, then you're just like, oh, now we're playing with fire. But also at the same time, it had to organically happen. And so I think that's why I'm excited. Like video game movies suck right now because, our generation is the ones making movies right now, but the video games we grew up playing was Super Mario Brothers, right? Your generation played PS3s and PS5s and shit with real stories in there, right? When you guys start telling stories, you'll understand the complexities of those stories ingrained in you because it is you. It's artificial to my, not to say that there aren't people trying and they'll make a couple that are okay. But like Sonic the Hedgehog was one of the best ones because that was actually part of my generation. We love fucking Sonic. I'm curious about, but what The Last of Us is going to be, right? Because I know that some of those filmmakers did love the game. And the fight director on that was the fight choreographer on Ride the Last Dragon. She was one of the stop motion artists on those games, and so it's going to be interesting because it feels like for a moment this might be a bridge that these people really loved it. It's ingrained in their souls, and now they're making it as a TV show. So I'm kind of curious. Like that might be my first adult video game that actually becomes a series that people enjoy. But so much of it has been crap because it's like you're asking like old movie veterans to make things that they don't actually like doing.
Yeah. I wish this timer wasn't here. I am half tempted to say, just send another link and start another one, just because I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think it's really interesting, especially like hearing like your takes on it, because I feel like this is like the first time I've heard like someone like in the older generation being like, "Oh yeah, like I can't wait to see what happens next." It's like
Well,
because yeah,
I think it's territorial, right? Like I think a
yeah,
lot of people I mean, it's just a natural thing. It's like, well, I got here. I want to stay here as long as I possibly can. So fuck it. I want to be able to do it. But I've never been that guy. Like, I think that like, I know the only reason why I got to be here is because someone had to give me room to get here. Right. And I'm ultimately a fan of great stories. I want to geek out on other people's things. I am a fan more than I am anything else. And so I'm excited to see what other people's stories are. I'm super excited. And it's also because I have kids that want to be storytellers. And I'm just like, oh, I want to see what your stories are. And so like that is something that I think it's inherent to who I am. But I totally get why maybe some folks in my generation are like, no, I'm holding on to this as long as possible. But I'm like, motherfucker, we made our money. Like, let's go, let's go. Like, you don't need a fifth house. So just let someone else come up in here. This party can't be yours. And also you smell, so.
I guess for my last question, this is I guess unrelated a lot to a lot of the other questions I was asking, but Patsy told me that you were super into D&D.
Mhm.
That I guess I was curious what like originally got you into D&D. I think you mentioned was your childhood friend.
Yeah, my child
Yep.
best friend. Yeah.
I guess also what was like your first session like? Just because I'm curious because we're doing a D&D session at my college that we're recording
Oh
and all that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay, should we start a new thing? Because I see I have a minute.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
probably the best.
All right.
I will send you the link over email again.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So we're gonna stop this one and we'll do it like.
Yes.
All right. Sounds good, man.
Give me one sec. And meeting for
Hello, hey, man.
welcome back. I guess. Uh, I guess as I asked before, what was your first session like in D&D?
I don't recall what our first because I was like 12 or something when we first played. Like it was mini, and I'm very far away from 12 at this point that I don't remember. I do remember that it was not right away. Like my friend Chuck uh, had bought all these D&D books and was like, man, we got to play this game. We got to play. And I at that point, I was really into like, I remember it was fall time. It was starting to get cold. And all I wanted to do was like get a few more sessions of basketball in, like, so, because with our neighborhood friends. And so it was like me, my friend Larry and Lamar, and my brothers. And all we wanted to do was play basketball. And Chuck was good at basketball too, but he's like, no, I spent a lot of money on these books, which are right here.
Ooh.
Had spent a lot of money on these books, and it's the second edition. It was it was the early '90s, and he was like, no, man, I spent a lot of money on these books. We really got to play this game, and so finally, like. I remember it was a very start and go thing. Like he was like, okay, I'll let you, like we'll play ball, but once we get tired, we're gonna try this out. We're gonna make character sheets, and so it was like a whole day of just making character sheets. Another day of just like coming up with backgrounds, rolling dice to figure out the vitals and all the statistics for our characters. And then I remember the first time we started playing, it was hard for us to kind of do the suspension of disbelief of it all because we had never done tabletop gaming. So we're just like, what? Wait, what's happening? Why? What are you doing? And he had never done it before, so he was trying to figure it out as well. And so it's like this is weird because it's like you're trying to tell us a story and we're not into it at all. And so, and then he did this miraculous thing, which is kind of like the basis of why She Kills Monsters became She Kills Monsters. The first time he figured out that if he based this character, like the story on things that kind of resembled shit that we lived in, like, oh, the princess was kind of like the girl that I had a crush on, and the evil antagonist was like the guys that tried to bully us, like people we legitimately hated, and then he would just directly just name them that to make us go, well, let's fucking kill the shit out of that guy. So suddenly he tricked us into really emotionally engaging with the story, and then we just saying, we really invested at that point. But I do remember it was a start and stop and go, but I remember this thing, and I do remember like going fuck, and what I never called it out because it's too young to understand what he was doing. But years later, I was like, motherfucker did like exactly what good storytelling is. He made it personal. He made you care. And because I cared, I engaged, and I carry that on as a storyteller. But like so many people I know who do what I do played or still play D&D because I think it's like such a good tool to do what I do, right? Like, like you're collectively creating a story. That's what you do in a writer's room. If you're an actor, it's acting out characters. That is a very helpful tool. If you're a DM, you are literally creating a story and having to adapt to it, which is literally what I do for a living. There's so much of that stuff, and then you're also dealing with like a dense mythology, right? And that is like so much of what in the last decade and a half when it comes to like Hollywood, it's what people are like geeking out about, right? They love their Games of Thrones, they love their Marvel universe, they love their DC universes because they love the mythology that is more than just this like an hour and a half to 2 hour film. They want to know that it has real depth that they can geek out on, and if they can't, it feels really shallow. So that's something that didn't exist, right? Like no one gave two fucks about like the backstory of Bruce Willis's character in Die Hard. Like he did a thing, but like I'm not gonna sit around like, what did he do in his life? What was his parents like? What was the lineage of badassery that he comes from? Like no one gave a fuck about that. But the amount of people who Wikipedia'd and kept up with the dense, mythology of Game of Thrones, like people who were not nerds, they were just like, well, I have to keep up. It's like you're doing what I did as a teenager that you mocked me for as a teenager when it came to comic books, you are now doing in your 40s. So, so I always find fun that Hollywood not only cashed in on geek culture, but they turned everyone into geeks. Like there's old people that really give a shit about like will he or won't they in like Marvel? I'm like, wait, how nerdy like this is stuff that I talked about this stuff growing up. Like who's stronger, Thor or the Hulk? I had that argument in the 7th grade. You're having this now as a full grown on adult, and it's a very funny thing that they just made normies into nerds. And I was like, hey, look at what we did. So.
All right. Just looking at what else I have in here. Project. I guess. Yeah. Okay. I'm just like looking at what I have, seeing if yeah. I guess do you have now that like your Strange World is coming out, you said in like 2 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have a plan for like what you want to do next? Like either like animation or like yeah.
Yeah, I'm working with Ryan Reynolds right now on a new live action film based on Side of Explorers and Adventures, which is IP from the Disney parks. So that's in live action. And then from there, I'm developing a couple of live action things that are based on like more personal things that are not big Hollywood, $200 million film fare. But that's stuff that I'm definitely spending some time on, and I am developing another. My plan is to develop another animated feature here. But yeah, like I think that that's the thing. Like I'm looking to tell stories that I'm excited to tell, you know. And so that's all I'm looking for. Like when I found a couple stories I'm really into to pursuing, and that's what I'll be next. But for right now, as soon as this movie's done, I might just take a couple months to just like chill with my family because I think my kids miss me. So I'm
That's
definitely gonna.
fair. Um, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No,
Anything you'd like
not
to
at all.
say?
I actually don't even know what this is for completely. I only know that Pat's just like, oh, like you're Dylan, you guys had an assignment to talk to somebody in the field, and if it was okay for you to talk to me, I was like, absolutely. And so here we are talking. So I don't even know what this is for. So I was like, happy to talk to you. Like it's always like I will say that that's the advantage of where you're at, right? Like the you have ultimate access by being able to go, hey, can I talk to you? I'm a student. And so many people will be like, yeah, absolutely. It's always weird when like someone's like, can I talk to you? I'm a young professional because I'm like, what do you want from me exactly? Because I'm not actually allowed to read your screenplay according to my contract. Whereas like when you're a student, you're like, oh, absolutely. Like I know what it is to be where you're at. And to like, I'm learning all this stuff. I want to know that there is a pathway towards doing what I want to do after I've learned it. And there is. That's the thing. Like, and you talk to more people, it demystifies it. Like, the less mystifying it is, the easier it is to do. Right. Like the first time, and when I first started studying, I studied in Louisiana, which was like an hour away from where I grew up in Arkansas. And so the idea of moving to New York City to pursue what I wanted to do as a playwright seemed terrifying until I just on a whim drove to Chicago and just spent a week there with some people that I had kind of loosely knew. And suddenly I was like, oh, traveling beyond my hometown is pretty effing easy. And then it wasn't, and so every step in the process of demystifying it made it easier to approach. So I think it's great that that I got a chance to talk to you. But I think I would encourage you if there's any piece of information advice I would give, talk to a lot more folks. Use that I'm a student thing to get to know folks. Demystifies it, but also creates great connections. When you're ready to jump into the field, you just shoot an email. It's like, hey man, I'm moving out to LA. You want to grab a coffee? I'm like, absolutely. That's pretty fucking easy. So I'm saying like, so I think what you're doing is the right thing to be doing. I think what Patsy is encouraging you guys to do is the right thing to be doing. And again, not everyone's going to say yes, but when you do get a handful, you only need a handful of yeses to have great conversations and have connections that will suddenly make going into the field less scary. You know. Again, I don't know. I don't know why I went off on that. I talk a lot.
You're fine.
That is who I am. So, well, it was great talking to you, man. I'm going to jump off so I can make it to a meeting, but it was lovely talking to you, dude.
Thank you again. Have a great
All right.
day.